What's up YouTube, it's Phanta, and I got a special treat for y'all today. Dark Hunters is a vampire fantasy series written by Sherilyn Kenyon, with the first book being released in 2002. Although there were some prototypes of this story released in magazines as early as 1986. This series is huge and expansive, containing 6 spin-off stories that all tie back into the main story, and they all bring the total number of books to 31. And that doesn't include any of the short stories or anthologies, which will make the total way higher. As a kid, I was really into this series, more specifically the Chronicles of Nick spin-offs. The main Dark Hunter series is more of an action romance situation, but the Chronicles of Nick were specifically written for teens, and it focused more on the fantasy, vampire, action aspects. I started the series with the 3rd book, Infamous, and if I'm being honest, I only picked it up because I thought it was a novel version of the PlayStation game. But the main character, Nick, really endeared himself to me. He came from a broken home and he would have constant bouts of anxiety, but he still wanted to protect others and take care of his mom above all else. I would eventually read the 4th book and a couple of others in the series, but after that I just stopped keeping up with it. But we're not here to talk about novels though. No, on this channel we talk about anime and manga. And lucky for us, the Dark Hunters got a couple manga adaptations. The first one, which began releasing in 2009, was an adaptation of the main Dark Hunter story and contained 4 issues, which I assume cover the first 4 books. The series was published by Yen Press and their Yen Plus monthly comic anthology. Yen Press is a huge manga publisher who translate and release a lot of manga and graphic novels in the US. In fact, from what I can tell, they publish nearly every important manga that isn't owned by Shonen Jump. But for some reason, they have a bad reputation. A lot of people call their translations cringy or inaccurate. But okay, the main Dark Hunters manga ended in 2011, and by that point, the Chronicles of Nick series had already released its first 2 books, Infinity and Invincible. And because of its heavier action focus and teenage main character, Yen Press decided to adapt this series into a manga as well. As a fan of this series, I'm a huge fan of this idea. Sherilyn Kenyon is a good writer, and she's great at shaping the thoughts and feelings of Nick and showing how his trauma affects him in his daily life, and how it shapes his interactions with other people. But she is not a good action writer, and her fight scenes have a limited impact as a result. But in a visual medium like manga, you don't have to find 100 different ways to say he punched or he kicked. You just show it. So with all that out the way, let's talk about the Dark Hunters Infinity. So like I said earlier, Dark Hunters Infinity is a 2-volume manga series covering the events of the first 2 books in the Chronicles of Nick series, Infinity and Invincible. The story follows Nick Gaucher, a young teenager with amazing magic powers, who lives in a small New Orleans town and is surrounded by a multitude of magic beings, including vampires, werewolves, zombies, and a lot of others. This story ties in with not only the main Dark Hunter series, but a couple of the spin-offs, so because of that I'll only be talking about the characters and side plots briefly. If you're really interested in this story, I recommend giving this manga a read and then reading the novels. And beginning to read the manga, the first thing that stands out to me is the writing. I noticed this when reading the novel, but Sherilyn Kenyon's strength is not dialogue. But that's not to say it's bad by any means. She has a knack for developing her world naturally, with background character conversations giving a peek into the wider world this story inhabits. She also does a pretty good job of delivering exposition through her dialogue, without it sounding stilted and awkward. But when it comes to the characters interacting with each other, there are a lot of unnatural lines that just come off as forced. The first example that comes to mind is the very first line that Nick says, "I am a socially awkward man-dork." But throughout the rest of the chapter, Nick doesn't talk like this, he doesn't say stuff like this, and he doesn't describe himself like this out loud. So this line just comes off as weird. The rest of this volume has very good to amazing representations of how teenagers speak, so this is just a little confusing. But other than that, the dialogue is pretty good, but some of it does come off as pretty typical and cliche. There's a couple of instances of "I can't die like this," "say your prayers," and "you're gonna pay for that." You know, cliche stuff. To go along with that, the series as a whole, but especially the 2nd volume, has a big problem with introducing new characters and not explaining their relationships with the established characters. The absolute worst example of this is in volume 2, where an extremely important character, not just to this story, but to the whole Dark Hunter series, named Xenon, is introduced without any regard to who he is. He just comes into the story immediately and starts helping the cast. I think the reason for this is the manga is attempting to be a one-to-one recreation of the novels, but it doesn't include any of Nick's inner monologues, so we don't get any extra context for any of the characters. They're just introduced. And for whatever reason, the creators of this manga decided not to include that many informational text boxes. Those will be extremely useful in not only introducing characters, but stating the passage of time. Speaking of time, this manga has a pretty minor continuity issue. It can be confusing how much time has passed even from page to page. You can especially see this after Nick is shot and released from the hospital. In one panel he's laying down in the hospital bed, and in the next he's already back home celebrating being released. And while this isn't the hugest problem, it's just a little jarring. The art is really the star of the show here, and it's the whole appeal of reading this manga. Even though the manga released throughout the early 2010s, it's really reminiscent of early 2000s action anime, stuff like Zatch Bell and Del Toro Quest. Most of the characters are really distinct and have nice designs, although it's nothing too unique. Characters like Ash and Simi are really standouts to me here. But one minor gripe I have is the artist of this manga tends to draw their characters pretty skinny and slender, so characters like Adrian Malachi and Xenon, who are supposed to be big and hulking, seem a little small compared to their book counterparts. Outside of the character designs though, the rest of the art leaves a lot to be desired. The story is full of unique fantasy creatures and monsters, from demons to werewolves, ghosts, zombies, and so much more, but the designs of these creatures end up being really generic and basic. The demons are just winged humanoids with fangs, and the zombies are just people frothing at the mouth. A little bit of unique flair goes a long way in helping the story stand out. The backgrounds are also just passable. For the most part throughout the story, the backgrounds are completely blank or undetailed, with most of the attention being placed on the characters, although the characters don't have an interesting or eye-catching enough design to allow this to work. The story usually resorts to using action lines so they don't have to show the same backgrounds over and over, even if it makes no sense or there's no action really going on. Because of this, it's hard to keep track of where the characters are from panel to panel. The story also has a huge lack of background characters, especially in Volume 2, and that isn't really something you notice until it's not there, and you really notice it here. The lack of characters makes it feel like Nick and the other main characters live in a ghost town, where the only people that leave their houses are the ones important to the story. But okay, I've done all this talking and I've barely talked about the plot yet. There's gonna be some minor spoilers here, so click the timestamp if you're interested in reading this, which I recommend you do. So like I said earlier, Nick Gaucher is a teenager with amazing magic powers, but he doesn't have the ability to access most of them now. In fact, at the beginning of Volume 1, he isn't aware of his heritage and doesn't know about any of the supernatural things going on around him, and there are a lot of them. Nick is the son of a powerful demon named Adrian Malachi. He's set to take over his father's place, but obviously he doesn't want to. As the story starts, we find out Nick is accepted into a prestigious high school after getting perfect 100s on entrance exams multiple times. Unfortunately though, Nick's intelligence is never explored or even brought up. He's constantly lost and confused, and he never really figures anything out for himself. He has to have his mentors explain everything that's going on around him in extreme detail. I think this is more for the benefit of the reader, but there has to be a better way to introduce these concepts to us. Although Nick's character isn't that well established anyway. Throughout the story, the characters are constantly commenting on how much of a good, nice, polite, smart kid Nick is, but his actions don't reflect that. Throughout the first volume, he gets into fights over the smallest insults, and he constantly disobeys authority that's just trying to help him. But I think worst of all is the event that changed his entire life. While walking home from school one day, Nick meets up with some friends. Of course, the manga does a terrible job introducing new characters, so we don't know who these guys are, we don't know what the relationship with Nick is, we don't even know their names. But that's besides the point. These guys ask Nick to be their lookout while they rob people, and Nick just agrees. And not for some big reward or because these guys are his best friends, he just wants to be a delinquent. And that's just a little contradictory to what all the side characters think and say about him. And going with that, none of the other characters get any significant development or screen time at all, save for one or two instances of a quick flashback. Even characters that are extremely important to the main Dark Hunter series like Raosha, Xenon, and Acheron don't get any screen time here. It just seems like a missed opportunity because there's so many interesting characters with unique designs that could be explored, but they choose not to. And all the side characters that do get a lot of lines follow the same template. They're all smart-mouthed and they make a lot of sarcastic comments. But that's all I have to say about the Dark Hunter's Infinity. Despite all the negative comments I said, I still think it's worth reading at least once. And I would definitely recommend reading these novels for the full experience, as they don't suffer from the majority of these issues, except for the cringy, awkward dialogue. In my opinion, The Chronicles of Nick is one of the best young adult novel series ever, and as the books continue, the story gets more focused and the character relationships make a lot more sense. Unfortunately, the manga series only covers the first 2 books, so I'd recommend using it as a starting off point and then reading the rest of the novels. That's all I got for y'all today though, but before you leave, make sure to check out my Twitter and follow me on there. I'll be posting updates on the new videos, as well as anime and manga recommendations, and I'll be having polls over there to decide what the new videos will be, so come check it out. But I hope you enjoyed, make sure to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.